part of China. The Dalai Lama had no choice but to work with the Chinese. 8 years later, on 10th March 1959, the citizens of Lhasa rose up against the Chinese occupation. The uprising was brutally quelled, and the Dalai Lama escaped to India. Nearly 100,000 Tibetans followed him into exile. Five decades later, Tibet's ancient traditions have found a new home in India. Here at a Tibetan monastery, the state oracle of Tibet has entered a trance. He pays his respects to the Dalai Lama in a tradition that goes back several centuries, but can now only be practiced in exile. Another integral aspect of Tibetan Buddhism that survives in exile is the system of reincarnation. Tibetans believe that certain spiritually enlightened beings can choose the time and place of their rebirth in order to continue the altruistic work of their former lives. These reincarnate lamas are discovered and recognized at a young age through a complex process that involves omens, dreams, divinations, and the council of oracles. The present Dalai Lama is the 14th reincarnation in his lineage and was discovered at the age of 3. Although there were several thousand reincarnate lamas in Tibet, the Dalai Lama was the most important. Not only is he Tibet's spiritual and temporal leader, he is also considered to be the human manifestation of Tibet's patron deity, the Buddha of compassion.
I consider myself as a very, very simple, humble Buddhist monk. In my case, of course, I'm Tibetan. So this body remain as a Tibetan body till my death. So through that way, there's some connection, of course, some moral responsibility there. We are fighting for our basic right. Firstly, as a human being. Secondly, cultured human being. We have long history. And our own language, rich language. So these are, even 21st century, something very useful, something very relevant. Therefore, it is really logical or reasonable to preserve these.
The return to Tibet marchers have been on the road for a few days. The majority are recent refugees who escaped from Tibet in the past 10 years. Raised under Chinese rule, they understand the desperation of the protesters in their homeland. At the end of each day, they listen to the latest news from Tibet, worried about the safety of their relatives and friends. The marchers know that the Chinese crackdown in Tibet will be harsh, but the extent and passion of the protests give them fresh hope and inspiration. A few days into the march, the Indian police suddenly stop and arrest the marchers. Despite this setback, the marchers are determined to regroup and continue. Over the next few weeks, more than 200 protests erupt across Tibet, some more than 1,000 kilometers from Lhasa. Many take place in ethnic Tibetan areas that were incorporated by China into the provinces of Qinghai, Sichuan and Gansu.
The Chinese had never witnessed such wide geographical spread of the demonstration and the intensity, the involvement of the ordinary Tibetan farmers, then monks, and also the students in there. And the other significant is these people are almost all under age of 50. That means they were all born and raised under the communist rule. So they are not sort of concerned about the feudal Tibet and the past. They are sort of really what the party called the children raised under the bosom of the Communist Party. What is clear and significant about these protests is that Tibetans are unhappy under the present regime in China. And it is a rejection of the current Chinese policy of development and progress that is sort of Chinese paradigm for Tibet.
Since the early 90s, China's economic policy for Tibet has been to inject vast sums of money to develop the region. Tibet is of enormous significance to China. It is strategically located at the center of Asia. It covers an area the size of Western Europe, but is sparsely populated. The great rivers of Asia have their sources here, and its vast mineral resources are largely untapped. Much of China's efforts are aimed at creating an infrastructure to make Tibet economically viable for the extraction of its resources. But most Tibetans have found themselves excluded from the material benefits of this boom. Instead, a massive influx of Chinese migrants has taken advantage of the new opportunities. The opening of the Tibet Railway in 2006 accelerated the pace of demographic change. In its very first year, the train brought more than 1.5 million Chinese to Tibet. A large number were migrant workers in search of jobs and business opportunities. In cities like Lhasa, Tibetans have already become a minority. There is a real danger that if the situation continues unchecked, Tibet's unique cultural identity will soon disappear. Poet and writer Wöser has observed the changes taking place in Tibet. She was stripped of all her political rights after writing sympathetically about the Dalai Lama and forced to leave Lhasa. She now lives in Beijing and, despite constant official harassment, continues to write critically about the situation in Tibet.
我觉得现在西藏最大的变化，并不是说是要面对中国的那种强大的那种军事上的帝国主义的行为，而是现在最危险的一个行为是文化上的一个帝国主义行为。如果说是，当然现在西藏的时间已经就是对于西藏的文化来说，西藏的所有来说的话，这个时间是很紧迫的。 Yarım çedinde sumim bata lo chunga chap nanglo ta phe shonda ren phe chi chag re den se do khasang ta ngan zo te phe lang le te te onne den zen thong na nga ta na onne lo chunga den yo ma lo chu lang shin phe chi chag re ta onne ta tha da te ning ga chim re sha.
The fact is that the nature and character of Chinese presence in Tibet is a vastly powerful ethnic group dominating, controlling the lives, and making decisions for a much smaller ethnic group, an ethnic group that has a very distinct history of nationhood, nationality, identity. That is a colonial type of presence.
Despite years of communist rule, Tibetans remain a deeply religious people. But in recent years, China has imposed increasingly harsh regulations to control the practice of Buddhism. Chief among these is the reintroduction of patriotic education campaigns, which require Tibetans to denounce the Dalai Lama. Such campaigns echo the dark